Hello, everyone, and welcome to today's webinar. We're very excited to be joined for a special session with our customer WithClutch, a super fast growth startup. I'm Kristen Glass, and I work in product marketing here. Before we dive into the webinar content, I want to cover just a couple housekeeping items. We want today's session to be as interesting for you as possible. So make sure to submit your questions and your comments for us into the Q&A and chat, and we'll try to answer them live as well as during a Q&A session at the end if we end up having some additional time. Now I'm going to transition to the next slide, and we'll go over a quick agenda for today as well as introductions. So for today, we're going to hop into WithClutch's story and how they heard about RudderStack, how they're using us to help fuel their growth, and what their plans are with RudderStack in the future. Then after that, I'll give a brief overview of RudderStack and how you can get involved with us, and we'll hop into the Q&A. So for introductions, I'll go with mine first. It's short and sweet. I am the Director of Product Marketing here at RudderStack. I previously worked at Cisco Meraki as well as a couple different startups. And now I'm going to hand it over to our two special guests for the day, Chris and Raphael. So feel free to introduce yourselves.
Sure. Yeah. Thanks, Kristen. I'm Chris. I'm one of the co-founders of WithClutch. Some previous background on me. We've been in the car space a while at this point. A little different on the software side now, but we had started this business called Calypso, which sold cars online. We sold that business to Carvana, where we stayed for 3 years. It was an incredible story. Had a great time working there. And then in last year, started this business in July of 2020. And I'll get more into the company in the background in a bit.
So I'm Rafael Magrin. I'm the head of engineering at Clutch. I've been working with tech for more than 10 years. I've been at Microsoft. I did a little bit of consulting with big companies, small companies, different areas like credit unions, airlines. Then I worked a little bit of a messaging platform for a couple of years. After that, I joined Nubank, a fintech in Brazil. Stayed there a while, helping most on the mobile front end. And now I joined Clutch to help get the first version live. We got it live on January. And after that, I'm starting to build a team and growing very fast.
Well, thank you both so much for joining us today. I cannot wait to dive into your story. So first, do you want to give us a little bit more background on WithClutch and how you started the company?
Sure. Yeah, let me start a little bit of background around just what we do in general and like who we help and why. And so one of the observations that we had while we were working at Carvana and at Calypso as well is like often when consumers end up buying a car, and this isn't true of just a car, but it's true of everything, like consumers end up wanting to buy a car. And so they don't think too much about the financing itself. And so you can actually exert a lot of control over what financing terms a consumer actually goes ahead and accepts or not, because convenience tends to outweigh a lot of what actually happens on sort of the rate side. And so we found is like, hey, consumers who bought from dealerships, often didn't get the best rate because they got the rate that they worked with a finance company that who paid the dealer the most. And then two, there's actually like, if you look at capital sources, there actually is an advantage to a lot of credit unions and community banks who often have not-for-profit status, who can lend at lower rates than competitive for-profit lenders. But often the disadvantage, because they don't have these huge tech teams, they tend to be small or regional. And so they've got a competitive balance sheet, but not a competitive tech platform. And so this is an activity we went through, but if you go through and you actually look at sort of loan categories and what sort of penetration credit unions have amongst the customers that are already theirs, you can see that even for things like auto loans, at most they have about 1/5 of auto loans of their own customer base. And it gets even worse for things like, unsecured loans is a great example where you have these new fintech players like Upstart or Upgrade, where credit union rates often are literally half of what those competitors offer sometimes. And so we wanted to build a technology product that really enabled these consumers to more easily, not necessarily get new debt, but switch into better debt in a really like easy, fast, transparent, and seamless way.
Wow, what an incredible story. Well, I wanted to dive into next a little bit more about your product and let us know some specifics about it.
Sure. Yeah. So I'll talk about the product. We can play the video here if that's helpful, or I can voice over here. But one of the things to remember about our product is like we are not the brand, and so we're building white label software for banks because banks have a lot of this trust, and banks are actually the ones trying to recapture their own customer subset or get new members. And so what we do is just trying to make the process as easy as possible for both the member or the applicant and the person actually doing the loan processing, because it's not as simple as like you submit a loan and the loan exists. There's actually a lot of work that goes along around in the background of what's actually happening. And so what we do is we create this white label platform that surfaces a super easy way to get a loan and see every loan that you might be approved for, sort of all in one fell swoop. And then simultaneously, it identifies loans that you already have where the credit union products would actually beat the products that you already have on your balance sheet. So if you have an auto loan with Capital One, we'll surface, hey, we noticed you have a Capital One auto loan. We could save you, 4% in interest each year. Click this button and sign a few e-signature documents, and it should be easy as that. And then in the back end, what the loan officer actually has a number of other documents that are connected via API to the lending origination system so that they can actually fund that loan as easily as possible. And so like what we're trying to do is we're trying to make these credit unions look like superheroes to their customers. And so that's a key for us. And so like in some ways, we're not building the brand, we're just leveraging the brands that already exist. And that actually creates some really unique data challenges for us that we'll talk about a little later.
Wow. Well, what an awesome story. I'm sure the credit unions just love having you guys too. So for the next piece, for some reason, there it is. I wanted to have you guys talk a little bit about what's important for your white label lending.
Yeah, good question. So there's a couple things too. Like every customer is different in some way. Like every customer has different rate sheets, and that means like the rates that they'll actually give to members. They serve different memberships for different purposes. They have different brand awareness. Like they have different ways of working loans too. So like their operations are all set up differently. And so one of the things that we try and sort of understand deeply is just like how are each of our customers working differently? And then B, how can they take the best of best from each other in some ways? Because in many ways, credit unions are rarely hyper competitive with each other. They're more hyper competitive with like large banks. And so like if you talk to the biggest credit unions, who do they really want to beat? They want to beat the Wells Fargos and the Chases of the world in consumer banking. And so for us, like a lot of what we need to do is understand, why is someone starting a loan application? What do the credit profiles look like? What are all the loans on balance sheet they have? Why did someone go ahead with an offer or not? What is like the marginal willingness to self-select into another loan? Like often what we find is that like $75 ends up being a key threshold of if you can save a member more than $75, that's the point at which they actually switch their finances. If it's 25 or, on the lower end, their elasticity to actually do anything about it goes far lower. And then the other challenge is just like, hey, a lot of this is very sensitive personal information. So we do collect a lot of PII. And so we need to make sure that these data systems that we have very well walled off controls on what goes where and why. And so like in choosing any of our vendors, that tends to be very, very important. And then 3, like our vendors, like to give you an idea of how the size varies, like the smallest partner we work with has about 7,000 members. The largest has close to 1 million. And so like the institution with 1 million members, like they're actually fairly sophisticated, right? Like they've got a development team. They understand that they need to be doing quite a lot in technology. Like they've got, like they're connecting a lot of these data points, their own internal marketing tools and communication tools versus, your smaller teams, when you only have 7,000 members, like there's you have a much more limited budget. And so sort of what you do and where you connect to and do you have these analysts? Like they're actually relying on us to do a lot of that work seamlessly. So like in many cases, we use our own off the shelf tools. And then in other cases, we're simply a conduit to the other systems within these larger institutions. And so we need to be able to sort of do both based on the size of partner that we work with.
Well, that's incredible. So you're handling a lot of data, a lot of different types of partnerships, and you have to figure out how to keep that all secure and how to connect with all of the partners and customers.
That's part of the challenge. Yes.
Big job. So how did you guys decide, given all of those challenges, especially the challenges with your data and making sure that you're connecting to customers in the best ways possible, how did you end up deciding to use RudderStack?
That's a good question, actually. So I was actually introduced to RudderStack from a struggling musician called Shvet, he's a friend from business school, and I think he had been an early investor in RudderStack. And effectively, one of the problems I was describing while we were still at Carvana is, Carvana in 2017 was in a very different place than where it is now. And so it's much more mature in terms of data infrastructure. But back then, you often had multiple data pipelines. You had different users consuming different information from different sources for different reasons. And so in trying to unify sort of all of these customer interactions in a way where both marketing and product analytics and compliance would all consume these same things for different reasons, it just ended up being a very difficult problem. And so I had sort of begun this exercise of like, what are other people using? What works? What doesn't work? One of our own internal teams had even piloted Segment at one point, which was a very powerful product. And so we got to talking with Shvet saying, hey, look, like these are trends that we're seeing in terms of customer data pipeline management that are, we're making sense. And this is probably in the 2019 timeframe now. And so when it came time to sort of leave Carvana and start again, we sort of knew we needed something. And the question is like, what's the best something? And so that's how we came across RudderStack and came across the ability to sort of like, we knew it was something that would scale in a way that Segment necessarily didn't. And it would just afford us quite a lot more flexibility too. And so that's sort of what led us to you guys.
Well, thank you for sharing your story. And now I want to dive into a little bit more details about how you're using RudderStack today.
So one of the things that was important for us right now is that, like Chris mentioned, that was a scalable solution, but at the same time was something simple that would not create a very big overhead to us. We grew a lot the team, but when we started using RudderStack, we had a very small team. So being able to focus on what was our main business was more important to us than to have like a big tools and a lot of complexity. So we actually started with the use case of using customer AO. So Chris, can you explain really quickly our use case for customer AO in this scenario?
Yeah, great question. So effectively, what we're trying to do in lending is basically recapture cart abandons. And so often what happens is, like we said, like somebody will start going through the loan process. They'll actually get through the process of a credit pull and then abandon. But once you see the credit pull, oftentimes you know that this person actually could have saved substantially. And so there's someone who, for whatever reason, was like on their phone, starts a loan app, and you see an Upstart loan that's at 29%, and the credit union is willing to offer them a 14% loan. And that's 100% a real example, by the way. And so this person has like substantial money that they could be saving each month, but for whatever reason they've abandoned. And so we want to be able to try and like recapture that member or user saying, hey, I know you didn't get the chance to see this, but when there's a more convenient time, consider coming back and initiating those savings. And so we came up with these very simple, just 4 trigger points of here's points at which we wish we could literally just say something to the end user in order to like motivate them. And we don't try and annoy people with like, hey, we don't annoy people who couldn't have saved or who couldn't have done these other things. So it's all intentional and trying to like be proactive and positive outcomes for that end user. But there were 4 circumstances where we wanted to connect via email or via SMS to try and get this member or user to reconsider finishing that application?
So when we started with this use case, we could have connect directly to customer IO, but we're discussing a little bit like, hey, we're going to start creating some events that mean something on the business side for what happened to the customer, so we can actually get to customer IO and take some actions. And we are also going to have some PII involved with it, like Chris mentioned. If you're going to send an SMS or an email, we're going to need that information to send to the customer. So we decided to go through RudderStack, so send events to RudderStack, and then go to the customer IO. Would be a little bit more complex in the beginning, but then it opened up for other things that we want to do later on. So then we started using it also with Amplitude, but then it comes an interesting part, because for Amplitude, we don't want to have any PII data there. We don't need that. We just need the information about the event or what happened. And with RudderStack, we use the same events we're generating to send data to customer IO, but we just use the transformation to clean up the PII. And in a day, we get Amplitude with the events live, and we started being able to analyze the information we want there. Another case that we use Datadog for monitoring the application, and having those business events there help us create alerts or something is going wrong on the business side. Same thing here. We need the information there. We don't need the PII. We just need the main data. Same thing, one day, field test, it was working. Now we're starting to send also to Redshift on AWS. So we can start having those events start long-term, and we can actually do some more querying, a little bit more, to get a little bit more deeper understanding of a few things. That's a little bit different of the analysis that we do on Amplitude, where we already know what kind of information we're looking for. So Redshift is going to be a little bit more exploratory. And then recently we had another use case that was quite interesting, because it's more like on the operational side, not really on the business side, that because of compliance reasons, we need to understand some of the things that are happening like, for example, what are the changes the application is having, who is changing something repository in GitHub and things like that. So if, again, with a few small configuration of RudderStack, we were able to get those events from GitHub, send them to Datadog, and have all the alerts we needed around compliance without much complexity. If we're doing the connection directly from GitHub to Datadog or some different way, it would be way more complex. So we're thinking a very interactive approach of like how we use RudderStack, and starting connecting new pieces that help us get where we want to be.
I love this. And how long did it take you to set up all of this?
So it's hard to say how long, because as I mentioned, like it was an interactive approach, right? We started with even customer IO, we started with a very simple use case and started expanding. But in general, like the RudderStack part was the most simple part. It was just like in a day, I could set up any of those connections, even less than a day. And the part where we spend most of the time is actually thinking about events and what we want to send to RudderStack, what are the business meaning of those events. That's where the most of the time is spent, actually.
Awesome. Well, I'm super excited to see this stack, and I wanted to ask you a little bit more about some of the use cases that you have on the horizon, because I know you guys said that you've been starting with RudderStack, but you've also been thinking about things you're planning on doing in the future.
Yeah, I'll jump into a couple of these, but this is where I mentioned, like, hey, the way small CUs, like for these cart abandons is a great example. Like for these small CUs, setting up a limited sort of standard set of automated communications triggered through our instances of customer IO make complete sense. For somebody who's a huge institution, they actually want to control all those communications, and they want to be able to have interactions where someone can sort of jump into those streams in a manual way too. And so like there's use cases down the road where we may want to inject a portion of these events actually into their marketing systems as well. So this makes it easy for us to say, okay, for partner A who has Salesforce Marketing Cloud that's different than customer, we want to send these events. And that varies by the technical aptitude of the partner that we're dealing with and what subsystems they have. Like some want to consume all these event streams, all these business streams, and others don't. And so being able to do this in a way that makes sense for our largest partner is like another way that this just makes our work easier.
Awesome. And I love how you guys have chosen RudderStack and you're really growing with it over time. So why did you choose as a startup to turn to something like RudderStack? I know some companies try to turn to tools like ours a little bit later. I want to learn a little bit more about why you chose to take a look so early on.
I think I'll leave that to Rafa, because I think one obvious question that we had when we started our team, like our first use case was customer IO, like integration with customer IO. And so like at first the question was like, okay, like why don't we just why don't we stream events just directly to customer IO? Why do we need this thing in between in some ways? And so I'll leave it to Rafa to comment on sort of why that made sense and why it made sense at the time and why it continues to make sense.
Yeah, so usually in the stage we are, we always think like, is this over engineering or not? And in that case, given my past experience with setting up analytics and things like that, if you don't get a few things right from the beginning, it takes a lot of effort and work to actually put that in later on. So we started playing a little bit of RudderStack, just see, hey, let's see if it works for us. If not, it doesn't add too much complexity to us. If it doesn't, there's no point of not using it right now, get the benefit and get the benefits later. That's what exactly happened. Like we started using it, was simple enough for us, not creating an overhead. It allowed us, our first use case, there was customer IO, but the other ones that we already had in mind them. We knew that would be easy to set them up if we had the pipe correctly in the beginning. So that was the main reasoning of like, let's start with RudderStack and not like connect things directly.
Awesome. I'm going to take a quick question that someone sent in really quickly. So they're interested, do you have any advice for someone who is looking at developing something like you guys did, or advice for someone starting with RudderStack or similar tools?
My main suggestion is figure out what are the first use cases you're going to have, and build something for those use cases, and not try to create something for the use case you're going to have in a year. And one of the key things is figure out what are exactly the events you need to build and what they mean in the business sense, not just in a technical sense of something happened. There's where I see most companies struggle, is like figuring out what exactly are the events you need to generate.
Awesome. Well, thank you so much for giving me your background. I know we have 30 minutes today and we're getting closer to the closing. So I want to go over a few quick details about how our viewers can learn a little bit more about RudderStack. So there's 3 main ways that I would recommend that you can learn more about RudderStack. For starters, you can start using RudderStack for free. And I've put the link to where you can sign up for free on RudderStack below. We also have a fantastic blog and a team of technical writers that are writing posts on our blog about our product and about the space. So if you want to learn more about the space in general, feel free to read articles on our blog. Our website's another good resource as well. And then finally, if you're interested in getting a demo or learning more about us from the sales teams, you can contact our sales teams. We have a contact form on our website at this link, and I would recommend that as the next place to go to. So now I'm going to hop into the Q&A portion, since we have a few minutes for Q&A. So the first question that came up is, you mentioned flexibility in your choice of RudderStack over Segment. anything specifically that stands out there now that you're using the tool?
Do you want to comment, Rafa?
In general, like I honestly, I don't have much experience with Segment, but for RudderStack, was very easy for us to use. It works very well for our use case, and the support we're having is very good. So, in general, that was the main decisions.
All right. And I know we have another question coming in since I see that someone's just about to submit it. But the next thing that it looks like people are asking is how was this process for setup? Was there anything that was unexpected in it? Was it pretty seamless?
It was seamless. I don't remember anything special that happened. We played around a little bit, tried a few things. Most of what we did, we didn't face any issues. It was like the documentation was clear on what we need to do, and that was it.
I think we had our first like viable business case actually like fully running within a week. And so like between when we started and when we actually had what we wanted to get out, which was just like simple 4 abandoned cart events. Like I think we actually had everything running end to end on our pipeline within 1 week.
Wow, that's impressive. Well, it looks like we have time for one more question. So I'm going to pick one more of the questions that came in. Do you have any other pointers on the things to get right at the beginning of architecting a stack for an early stage company?
Yeah, I would say is try to understand the business and what are the events you need to track. I know I mentioned that before, but that's the hardest part. Once you get that and you get the information to RudderStack, it's easy to play around with different tools, connect to them, and see which one makes sense for you.
Well, Rafa and Chris, thank you both so much for taking the time out of your busy day to be on this webinar. We really appreciate it. For our viewers, if you want more information about RudderStack or about WithClutch, feel free to visit our website. And thank you so much for joining us for today's webinar.
Cool. Thank you.
Thank you.